Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 6 of the Progress Report, a weekly program about economic development and local government in and around Green Bay and Brown County. I'm your host, Bill Meindl. A big thank you to Political Radar for creating, sponsoring, and producing this new show. How am I doing? That once was the refrain of former New York Mayor Ed Koch. Today on the Progress Report, we're doing a How Am I Doing episode, but instead of Koch in New York, we're looking at Green Bay and Brown County. How is local government doing in the city of Green Bay and Brown County? To help answer that question is my guest, Dr. David Helpap, Assistant Professor of Public and Environmental Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. What is the state of local government here, its strengths, its weaknesses? Who are some of the people driving local politics? Is local government here dysfunctional or doing just fine? Welcome, Dr. Helpap, to the Progress Report.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you're here. First off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Most of my research and teaching interests are in state and local government and public administration. So the kind of management of cities, both financially and in other respects. Prior to joining the faculty in Green Bay about 6 years ago, I received my PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And while I was doing that, I was a nonpartisan policy analyst, and I also worked for several local governments.
So all told, at UWGB, you've been there for about 7 years, I believe.
Yes, about.
You've partially answered this, but generally speaking, what kind of courses do you teach? Scholarship do you do? And how do you go about monitoring local government? That's a big mouthful right there.
So the courses I teach, Introduction to Public Administration, Public and Nonprofit Budgeting, State and Local Government, Regulatory Policy and Administration, Public Policy Analysis, and a few other courses kind of related to public management and public policy.
What is your overall assessment of City of Green Bay and Brown County government from your perspective?
I guess, could you be a little bit more detailed, like just as far as?
Well, I think there's a perception among some that local government here, namely the City of Green Bay, is dysfunctional or can be dysfunctional. Is that a fair thing to say or not?
Well, I think my opinion probably matters a little bit less than the opinion of the citizens of Green Bay and the people who work closely with Green Bay, because Green Bay certainly passes a budget every year. It plows the streets. It provides the services it's supposed to provide, fire and police, public safety. So in that regard, the city of Green Bay is operating just like any other city, and it seems to be doing a fairly good job at it. But perception in some cases is reality. So if you have citizens, developers, people who are looking to invest in the city that think that because you see arguments and a lot of attention given to outspoken members of the Green Bay City Council, that this is going to be a headache for them to develop, or they don't want to deal with that, or whatever the case may be. If it starts to impact the growth of your city, then yes, I think it is a problem. And there may be some recent examples that could highlight that.
It seems to me these disagreements that happen from time to time with the City of Green Bay, the City Council, and what have you, get emphasized more because for a city of 100,000, Green Bay gets a lot of press coverage relative to its size.
Yes.
There's a daily newspaper, there's 4 television stations with news departments, there's some radio coverage, there's social media. I mean, in a place like Chicago, Green Bay would be just another suburb.
Absolutely.
So there's that intensity
of
press coverage, which...
Green Bay is one of the largest media markets in the state. So if this is your largest city, if this is your largest metro, you're going to get the attention. People come and pay attention to the city of Green Bay, and less so LOA or De Pere or Ashwaubenon to some degree. This is your flagship city.
So if people are squabbling on the city council, that gets out and about to the region, and that becomes the perception.
Absolutely.
There are some issues to be sure, but it strikes me that local government around here is relatively clean and honest. Not like some other municipalities around the country. Would you say that's accurate to say, or am I being very naive?
Well,
there are some issues. I know there have been some issues, but overall.
I don't want to get into kind of the details of some of this too much, but we historically categorize Wisconsin and some of the other Midwestern states as moralistic culture, as having a moralistic culture. And in this type of culture, there's generally an emphasis on good government. Wisconsin has a long tradition of progressive governance. And there's this idea that people participate, we hold our elected officials to a high standard, and we want our government to work for us and provide good services and do those types of things. So you're starting from that sort of base and tradition. And, when you compare it to other cities, off the top of my head, like a Chicago, which obviously is comparing apples to oranges, but you see, I think, a very different culture over the course of the city's history. So it seems like, for all intents and purposes, yes, it doesn't seem like there's a lot as far as corruption and graft and kind of those historic sins going on. But even then, we've had some examples of things not going perfectly, as any city does.
Just as an aside, you mentioned progressivism. Where is Wisconsin right now on that? It's changed, hasn't it?
There is some argument to be made that it has changed a little bit. Bob LaFollette was a historic figure in Wisconsin and fought for a lot of different good governance, progressive changes, and we've had a nice tradition of that over the years. And I think there's just perhaps maybe a little bit less emphasis on that in changing policies away from some of those things. Does that mean the state is immediately going to become corrupt and mired in all sorts of issues? No, but you just don't see the type of emphasis that I think that we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Going back to local, two of the biggest names in local politics, biggest names, are Guy Zima and Mayor Jim Schmidt. Those are two of the marquee names, if you will. Let's start with Zima, who's on both the Green Bay City Council and the County Board. Any thoughts?
Well, in order to be any type of elected official, a representative, you have to do a number of things. You have to create public policy, you have to represent your constituents, and you have to provide some oversight of staff and those types of things. So if you continue to get elected, that indicates that you are representing your constituents to some degree, at some level. But at the same time, you also have an instance where you have some very strong personalities in City Hall right now, and it seems like that's the way it's been in recent past. And we see that strong personalities tend to get attention, for better or worse. So when an issue comes up where there's disagreement on the council or with the mayor and the council, the first person that media tends to focus on is the mayor, and then the very next person that they go to is Alder Zima, because there has been that historic conflict. So if you do have that type of personality, you do tend to get attention, and it becomes a reinforcing mechanism.
Typical read on Alder and Supervisor Zima is that he serves his constituents well within the two districts that he represents on the City Council and the County Board. He takes care of his constituents if they have problems, issues, concerns, what have you. But in the big picture, I'll say it, talk to people off the record in local government, city and county, and Zima is almost universally disliked, considered an albatross around the neck of local government. So there's that dichotomy.
This is where, the perceptions of people outside of a community and even inside the community matter quite a bit, especially as a city is trying to grow and to compete for development, not only with neighboring communities, but within a larger region, in the state, within the country. If you see some of these things occurring, that can be problematic. You don't want people to shy away from your city because of one individual or something like that.
There are many people in his district who think he's terrific. People outside the district who are looking at the bigger picture for the city of Green Bay who have a different impression.
Correct. And that's something that is for the city as a whole, thinking about not just the alder himself, but the broader city council, going back to your discussion on dysfunction. There may be strong personalities. You may not particularly like the people you're working with, but at the same time, if you truly do care about the city that you're working for, you should be able to set some of those things aside and act in a very civil way, a very professional way. because people are watching. Students that I teach are watching. And in some cases, when certain news stories come out, it's sort of a running joke, which is all well and good until that joke affects development and growth and the citizens of the city.
And what about Mayor Jim Schmidt?
With regard to anything specific?
Well, he's one of the longest tenured mayors in the history of the city of Green Bay, will be the longest at the completion of his term. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's 16 years. He's been there quite a while. There's been a lot of development in the city while he has been mayor.
Yes.
But there are also issues with him as well where people disagree with him.
Sure. I mean, if you're in a public office for that length of time almost anywhere, you're going to have people that support you, and you're going to eventually ruffle some feathers. There's no doubt that he's given significant attention to downtown and downtown development and some of the corridors around downtown. And it's really hard to argue that it's not important because for better or worse, people judge cities based on their downtowns. Whenever I travel, whatever city I'm going to, I immediately will look at the downtown and see what's going on and what's to do and transportation and those types of things. So that focus is for the betterment of the city, even though it may not seem like it sometimes.
The mayor didn't help his cause any with the 3 misdemeanor campaign finance violations.
You've recently had members of the city council. You've had the mayor engage in some of these types of things, and this doesn't help the reputation either. So again, if you really do care about the city that you're working for, you have to realize that this is a reflection of not just you, but the city itself. Mayor
Schmidt may have been ready to retire as mayor anyway, but with the convictions in court, that may have had an impact as well on his decision.
Perhaps, yes.
Both city and county government here are nonpartisan, but the Brown County Board with suburban and rural representation, fair to say, is generally conservative, while the city council in Green Bay, more urban, generally is moderate. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes. I think especially as the community tends or continues to change, and it is changing, you'll probably see more of that. We see this kind of nationally, where you have ideology and partisan preferences that tend to align with different parts of the country, with different parts of counties, with different parts of cities. And I think you still have a pretty strong rural representation on the county board, suburban conservative representation on the county board, whereas you're starting to see more, I think, progressive attitudes and more kind of left-leaning attitudes within the city of Green Bay itself, perhaps the city of De Pere, a few other areas. So as it continues to change, I think you'll probably see that more clearly.
You said the community is changing. All told, what did you mean by that?
Demographic changes as different groups continue to move into the city, different ethnic and racial groups as the population, if it continues to get younger, obviously a good thing for the city, but that means more as far as political preferences and just the desire for services. Because every city wants to see like this millennial group moving in, right? Younger professionals moving in, taking ownership of their city, but this group tends to want more services. It wants walkable neighborhoods. It wants good transit. It wants nice parks and bars and restaurants. So if you really do want to attract this type of population, just having low taxes isn't necessarily going to do that for you. You also need to provide good quality services that will make these individuals interested in your community.
So you see that change happening in Green Bay and Brown County?
I do. Not necessarily as fast as it's happening elsewhere, but I think you see that emphasis on downtown, the high demand for housing downtown. De Pere as a suburb has a walkable downtown, and that is popular. They're seeing more housing development there. So I think just taking a look at the market, you see this happening.
On the city side in Green Bay, big issues right now would include the Hotel Northland, the shipyard, the wheel tax, Colburn Pool, which never goes away, the code of conduct complaint against Zima. Take your pick.
Well, I mean, the bigger projects take time, and to do economic development requires patience, sometimes more than most people have.
Sure.
And I think the Hotel Northland project illustrates that. I think at the end of the day, it'll be a really nice project. It'll be great for downtown, but it's been a long ride, so to speak. Again, not terribly different than projects that you'd see in other cities. If this were a big community, a much bigger community, this would just be a project that got delayed and it would move forward and eventually succeed. But because it's kind of unique in a city of this size, it tends to get that media attention. And then with the shipyard, I mean, that's, again, I think pretty illustrative of competition and regional competition and perhaps the need to streamline decision-making and try to get agreement and cooperation sooner in the process.
It seems to me on some of the development issues that sometimes among some of the alders that it's not necessarily the merits of the issue that they disagree with, it's just they don't like the mayor. And it becomes, I'm not going to support something the mayor likes.
Yes.
And it's that basic.
Yes, it does seem that way sometimes. But, again, if you really want to see your community succeed and you're self-aware enough to realize that Green Bay of 30 years ago isn't Green Bay of today, and Green Bay of today isn't going to be Green Bay 30 years from now, you have to realize that you need to move the city forward. You need to develop certain things. You need to acknowledge these changes, and you need to work together to make sure the city responds to that. Because if you don't, the city is going to be overtaken by some of its suburbs, by the Fox cities, by other communities, and you don't want that to be the fate of the city, like other Midwestern industrial, smaller mid-sized cities.
In my opinion, you saw that with the shipyard didn't move to Ashwaubenon, but the main tenant
Correct.
of the shipyard moved to Ashwaubenon.
Correct.
There they go.
And it seems like a downtown riverfront baseball stadium would have been ideal, not just for the city of Green Bay, but for the tenants, because that's so unique and it gives you a nice draw and you're within walking distance to some of the Broadway businesses. And so it seems that it was so frustrating that they were willing to give that piece up to go to a more landlocked kind of location that isn't even necessarily all that close to some of the main attractions in another community.
It was a cleaner deal and quicker decision making. It had to be attractive.
Seemed to be the case.
Yeah. On the county side, a big story is the new county sales tax and whether it will hold. It's under legal challenge right now.
Well, I think this was a case where it was really kind of pleasantly surprising to see the agreement from the county board to move these types of things forward, these types of projects forward. I thought there were some really good arguments in favor of the financial structure that they used using the sales tax, because using that type of mechanism, you're allowing other people to pay for some of your projects that are, especially in Brown County, where you have a lot of tourists coming in and out throughout the year. And from someone who studies kind of public finance pretty regularly, it's a really kind of nice way to do things.
This may be an oversimplification, but in a way you're replacing bonding with a sales tax and a hotel room tax.
Yes, yes.
The essence of it, it seems to
right. Me. And it's not like there's this argument that the services that are being provided with this new sales tax aren't needs per se, they're just wants. But at the same time, at some point, something has to be done with the Brown County Arena. Something has to be done with failing roads. You have a jail that likely needs to be expanded. And again, you want to provide services that are going to draw people here. And it isn't necessarily low taxes that's going to do that. At least most research tells us that. As
you mentioned, Dr. Helpap, it was almost, I don't know if you use the word remarkable, but in my opinion, a remarkable achievement that plan went through for the county capital projects, $225 million, and it simultaneously addresses these infrastructure needs in the county, which have been accumulating for years because they've been putting things off. Or a common phrase on the county board is kicking the can down the road. But it also reduces county debt and it reduces the property tax levy. So there's something to appeal to a lot of different interests.
Yes.
The vote was 23-3 on the county board, which was remarkable.
It was an overwhelming vote, and when you think about it, these people are elected in a representative democracy to represent their constituents. So we like to think that the people who made this decision are pretty reflective of the community as a whole. And you know, what's important here is that we have some nice capital assets in this community, especially for the size of the community. And you have to be willing to maintain those because that's what's going to draw people. And you have to be willing to improve those. And this will do it for you. And we'll do it without a significant financial burden on the residents, I think. In fact, we're very familiar with this level of taxation in Brown County because of the Lambeau fuel tax. And there have been other communities throughout the country, Oklahoma City comes to mind, that have done remarkable things with just a small increase in sales tax that has really increased the quality of living for their residents. And it's been approved over and over and over again by their voters because they realize the value of that.
In addition to the Expo Center that you mentioned, which would replace the Brown County Veterans Memorial Arena, another big beneficiary of the capital improvements project would be just county highways. I know in the city of Green Bay, it's been an issue about the quality of the streets and street repairs.
Yes.
But here on the county side, up close to $60 million would be spent on county highway improvements.
And I think at the state level, we're realizing or we're seeing what happens when you can't come to an agreement on a long-term funding strategy for transportation projects. So I think Brown County actually has the opportunity to be a real leader and to show like, okay, we can come to agreement and we can fund our infrastructure. And kind of going off of that, the STEM center on campus,
there you go.
I think is going to be important because not only does this provide you with kind of a new mechanism to draw students to the area, but at the same time, you're also hopefully producing future engineers and future people that will be taxpayers and will stay in the area and really should pay for itself after a while.
One more thing, Dr. Helpap, I'd like to talk about before we go are the elections coming up for Green Bay City Council and Brown County Board, which are on the ballot April 3rd. Do you have any predictions or any sense of how things might turn out? There's a number of contested races, particularly on the city side, but a little bit on the county too.
There are, and that's encouraging. When we completed the 2016 Brown County Life Study, one of the indicators was that a lot of people who were running weren't facing challengers, and then the people that even faced challengers were still winning by large margins, 20, 30, 40%, which at a national level is beyond landslide. So just to see more people running and interested is a great sign. And I think that also may be indicative that people want to see some change, and they want to be part of that change. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we kind of want as many people to participate in politics as we can, right? So I see that as a positive thing, and some of these challengers are actually very high quality. They're well known in the community. Not that all of them aren't, but I mean they're well known in the community. They have important roles, and it's nice to see that interest in the civic side of things as well.
Probably the top marquee race is Brian Johnson versus Guy Zima for City Council.
Yes. When I made that comment, I think I was mainly thinking of that race and that you're drawing on someone that's pretty well known in the community. He has an active role in downtown Green Bay, and would be considered, for all intents and purposes, a good high quality candidate.
Just a reminder, on the ballot April 3rd are other races beyond Green Bay City Council and Brown County Board, including the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and depending on where you live, school board races and other contests. Vote April 3rd. And that's it for episode number 6 of the Progress Report. Thank you, Dr. Helpap, for appearing.
Yes.
And thanks to executive producer Dan Jones, producer Jacob Jones, producer Darian Goheen, editor Christian Rivera, and technician Serena Woyak. Be sure to subscribe to Political Radar on YouTube, join the Political Radar community group on Facebook, and you can support this show financially by purchasing Political Radar merchandise from our shop. For more discussion, check out Blind Partisan, plus Green Bay development news on Skyscraper City. This episode of the Progress Report was recorded March 9th, 2018. Thanks for watching. See you next week.